Thank you. Okay, so as Carl said, we've already got a really well established understanding of characteristics in the workplace that can make the workplace more healthy or introduce risks for stress, anxiety, and depression. The research in these areas is really well established. We've got existing frameworks, we've got the management standards, which really provides that framework for understanding the nature of these healthy or unhealthy workplace characteristics. But actually, as we all know, the workplace has changed considerably in the last 4 years. We've seen huge changes to working practices. Mostly the sudden nature of the changes were, of course, related to COVID, but also we're seeing an increasing rise in digital work anyway. It's just increased the pace with which that was introduced. And consequently, we've now got much higher levels of home working, and we've got new models of home and hybrid working that are really still developing. Organisations are still adapting to what the situation is, how best to serve the needs of the business whilst maintaining a healthy balance for the individuals. And we know that home working is actually quite popular with many, not with all. And it's also demonstrated to have a positive impact on productivity in some contexts. So we know that it's likely to sustain, that home and hybrid working isn't likely to go away, and that the current levels of hybrid working, there's lots of different statistics depending on which survey you look at, but they're generally around 40% of people currently hybrid working, and probably around 16% working from home. So this is quite a substantial proportion of the workforce. And so it's really important to understand, what are the work characteristics like of working at home? What does the new world of work look like for those people who work in a home and hybrid context? And what risks might this bring? How can we enhance the benefits? And how can we manage those risks? Next slide, please, Carl. So many of you will be sat at home right now, like I am certainly, and I think Ian certainly was as well. Many of us work from home. I probably work from home 4 days a week, and it's a very common experience for us now. It's not suitable for all jobs, but for those jobs where working at home is an option, there's sort of standard characteristics developing. We now know what that looks like and what that means for us a little bit more. So we've had 4 years to really start to understand what are the characteristics of these new modes of working. And I've just noted here some sort of major changes as a starting point, features or characteristics that we need to start thinking about. The first thing is, of course, for many, that means the commute will no longer exist. For some, that's really fantastic. It has financial benefits and so on. For others, it didn't make much difference. For some, it actually brings positives. And actually, that's the theme that goes right throughout these characteristics. If we think about interaction with peers, there's benefits and there's costs, but what's certainly happened is the nature of our interaction with peers has changed. We see people less face to face, and we're also more able to click a button and see people really quickly. So there's a lot that's changed. Our engagement with the organisation has changed in many ways. We've, of course, increased the extent to which we work digitally, and we now are more likely to have a remote manager, or at least a manager that we are remote from some of the time. The final thing here is the big difference, and this really goes without saying, but it's an incredibly important point. We're working within the home. And why this is really, really relevant for us to think about is we're all individuals. None of us come to work just as a member of a team or a member of staff within an organisation. We're all people that bring with us our character, our background, our individual circumstances, and so on. And this is true wherever you work. However, when we start working from home, those individual circumstances become perhaps even more pronounced and have a bigger impact. Those people with lots of challenges in their home life may find it more difficult, for instance, to work from home, or they may find it helps them balance those challenges much more effectively. So what we've got is a whole pattern of characteristics of the work that are new and different. And we really need to start thinking about how these are impacting on people, what are the benefits and what are the potential risks. Next slide, please, Carl. So, as with everything in the area of work-related stress, the benefits and the risks associated with these different characteristics are really complex. For each new element of this pattern of working, for each new characteristic, there's patterns of benefits and potential costs. So, for instance, our interaction with our peers, we tend to have fewer distractions. Many of you will be familiar with the thought of wanting to work from home because it's easier to focus because we don't have the distractions of those people around us, and that may be magnified if you're in an open office, for instance. But alongside that, we've lost some of the social support. And there's a tendency that we're less likely to benefit from informal learning and opportunities for building a team and collaborating with those people that we work with. So there's some benefits, but there's also some costs. And the same is true for every new characteristic. So with regards to our increase in digital working, it's really increased our efficiency and our productivity. But alongside that, of course, our work intensity has increased exponentially. And many of us now live in a world of back-to-back meetings. And this isn't true for everyone, but it's true for quite a lot of people. And the organisations that we engage with at the Centre for Human Factors at the University of Hull, we work with lots of different organisations across lots of different sectors. And that feeling of the constancy and the intensity of the work is very much a challenge across many different sectors. Also, we've got the advantages of this digital working. For instance, I can sit on the webinar today and communicate with so many people from across the world. I can see people coming in the chat from all over the place, and that's a really exciting opportunity. It gives us more opportunity for attending things we wouldn't physically be able to attend, but also it allows us that kind of opportunity for collaboration. And in my work, I can collaborate with more organisations, other institutions like other universities, and that's a massive advantage. But it comes at a cost of the intensity of work being difficult to manage. Our manager is sometimes remote, which was a very interesting theme of the information that Carl and the team collected ahead of this session. We asked what were the principal challenges that people thought were the key things that are difficult in home and hybrid working. And one of the things that kept coming up again and again was that it's difficult for managers to identify, spot, observe those signs of stress, that when you see somebody regularly, you can really sense a change in a person that might necessitate some sort of intervention, additional support, or even just a moment to ask how someone is. And that is much, much more difficult when people are working at home. And the more they're working at home, or the more frequently a person's working at home, the harder that is. There's also a challenge around remote monitoring. The nature of the digital systems that we use allow an observation of whether people are currently in a meeting, whether they're currently online, and so on. And in some contexts, that can be an additional risk and really give rise to stress and concern about being constantly monitored. And also in terms of engagement with a manager, there's definitely fewer opportunities for that support and feedback and guidance that we know is a really important part of a quality manager-team member relationship. So what we're seeing here is that those features from the management standards are replicated here, but with additional very specific elements. So around demands, now we've got the additional demands around increased work intensity and what it means to be working digitally. And under the traditional management standards heading of support, we've got manager support and the challenges of engaging and maintaining a quality relationship at a distance. So we're still operating within this framework of this known understanding of the characteristics that are important to us. But what we need to do is think, and what do these things mean for people working in a home and hybrid way? So that's the sort of work that we've been doing. The final point here about working within the home, this is a really, really emotive topic. And meeting with the team yesterday, we spoke about how difficult it can be if you're a 9-to-5 worker to do your life admin, and how opportunities to be flexible when working at home bring additional opportunities to do those things which need doing, that just make that interface between life and home just that bit easier. There's certainly that's very much a strong trend of the reasons why some people find it much easier to work from home, at least some of the time. The physical workspace is, of course, very different from home. For some, it would be full of peace and quiet and a safe space to work. And for others, it might be full of distractions of small children and other people that they care for. And the setup might be very different. Some people, perhaps those further on in their careers, might have very suitable workstations and workspaces which are conducive to effective work, and other people might not have that opportunity at all. And when I think back to the work we did at the beginning of lockdown, many people we spoke to were sitting on the corner of the bed and working on a laptop on their knees. And the circumstances of home workers aren't quite so drastic now, because we've had an opportunity to adapt and put those things in place to protect people. But it's still a responsibility of an organisation to make sure that that workstation is suitable and conducive to effective working. And finally, one of the really big new elements of challenge around working from home is this establishing boundaries, being able to separate your work life from your home life. And that often comes along with working long hours and not really switching off, because you can go back very easily to your office or your little workspace after dinner, much more easily than you can go back to the office. So my point here really is about the complexity of the benefits and the costs. So for every one of these new workplace characteristics, there are things that work really well, and there are things that work much less well. Next slide, please, Carl. So to add to the complexity, one thing we really want to try and understand, now we're building up a picture of what people see as the benefits and the costs of home working. As scientists, we now need to really explore and gather solid evidence around what's the relationship of these benefits, risks, and characteristics in relation to work-related stress. Which of the risks do we need to worry about? Which are the risks which are predictive of mental health difficulties? And what benefits can we protect to offset some of those costs? So it's understanding, okay, how can we prioritize these benefits, and how can we manage effectively the risks that this brings? The data around this is still emerging. It's really, really complex. But what we're finding is whether one of those work characteristics is a benefit or a risk is influenced by many, many complex variables. And I've tried to sort of briefly summarize the categories of these variables for us here. So there's elements of the work. For instance, if you are working on something that would benefit from being collaborative, of course, that hugely benefits in general from being in a shared physical space with the people you're working with. If, however, the work that you're doing requires focused concentration and blocks of time where you just work alone on a piece of work, like writing a report, I would argue that would largely be done much better working from home, but it depends on the nature of the work office. And this is where things get really, really complex. There's so many variables which influence this relationship between the work characteristics and the stress, that all we can do at the moment is really map out that landscape and try and understand what it looks like for us. So other things that influence that relationship are the level of autonomy. We know that control in the workplace is a really effective way of helping people to manage the challenges and the demands that they face. So a level of autonomy is a key variable here around the nature of the work, and also the frequency of home working. The benefits and the costs of home working will be influenced by the frequency by which one works at home. If one works at home 4 days a week, you are more likely to reap the benefits and the risks than someone working perhaps 1 day at home. The next category of variables here is individual circumstances. So what's a person's home life like? If their home life involves many caring responsibilities that are benefited by being able to be flexible and be in and around the home, then of course being at home will be a benefit. But then there's the distraction element. So it's a very, very complex picture. One thing that is much more simple is about the role of work experience. So for somebody who is new to a role or new to an area of work, for instance, if you were starting work as a new social worker, the value of being around your peers and your more experienced peers is enormous. So if we work from home under those sorts of rules and we lose our opportunity to interact, we lose a great deal in direct learning and modelling and an understanding of the ways of dealing with the challenges. The other thing that influences whether these things are a benefit or a risk is about the social climate. Many workplaces offer really great social support, but not all. And in some cases, people might prefer to take a break from that working context, the social climate within their workplace, and that really is a moderator of the extent to which people might enjoy or benefit from hybrid working. And the other thing is that very closely related is that relationship with one's manager. And if the relationship with a manager is difficult, the challenges associated with being remote are perhaps different from those of being in person. And then very briefly, some personal characteristics. People who are, for instance, extroverts might benefit more from the social context. People that are introverts may find it harder to be in an office environment 5 days a week and may find it more important to have opportunities to work by themselves. A person's ability to self-regulate and manage their boundaries is an important personal characteristic, as is tolerance to noise. So those of you that work in an open office or quite a lively, noisy context will know that some people cope with that much better than others. So what we've got here is a huge range of complex variables which impact on our experience of home and hybrid working. These characteristics, these variables change the impact of working from home, working in a hybrid way, or working full-time in the office. And what we really need to do is attempt to understand what that looks like for individuals. Next slide, please, Carl. So, as I said, this is still very much an emerging science. There are a series of pros, there are a series of cons that are broadly recognised within the literature, and emerging now are some key risks that are emerging as important things to take account of when thinking about work-related stress. So the pros and the cons won't be news to you. The pros of home and hybrid working: flexibility, better work-life balance, saving time from commuting, and more productive, more focused, fewer work interruptions. And what the current data is demonstrating is that more focused home working actually positively influences work engagement because we have fewer interruptions, so we engage more positively with the work that we're doing. Common cons identified within the literature: increased workload through the application of digital tools. We'll all be aware, as I said at the start, the increase in the pace of work and the intensity of work is undeniable through digital mechanisms. The digital means that we use the tools that we use are really driving a faster pace of work. There are blurred boundaries between home and work, which of course for some can be a benefit, but it can also mean that it's difficult disconnecting from work. And for those people that are home workers, I've heard people say unless they actually go on holiday, they don't ever switch off from work. And finally, the most noted risk is associated with isolation and lack of social interaction, which then negatively impacts on work engagement. It negatively impacts on learning, and largely speaking, it's found to negatively impact on peer support. One last point on this is about those risks that have been found to predict work-related stress. And these really are drawn from a sort of overview of the literature, but they're also very much what we found in the work of myself and the team working with different organisations across different sectors, running stress risk assessments and really exploring that statistical relationship between factors in the workplace and the occurrence of mental health difficulties. And those are the key things that are being identified are work with emotional demands is particularly difficult when working from home. So to use the social worker example again, if you are a person who works in a context where there's an emotional level of demand to your work, the lack of peer support and the face-to-face contact is more impactful. Time pressure is and workload are closely related features of the way that we work digitally. And also when management is not optimal, when the managers don't have a positive relationship with their team, this can really impact on the trust when we're working remotely and the feelings that a person is trusted and valued within their organisation. Next slide, please, Carl. So what can we do? That was an awful lot of information and really attempts to lay out the landscape of the nature of the challenge here. What are we trying to do? And what we're trying to do is understand what are the range of things in the workplace that we need to be conscious of. What do we need to think about and what risks are associated with these new ways of working? And what we can do about this practically is follow the guidance to undertake the requirement to undertake a stress risk assessment. Now, the duty for organisations is to undertake a stress risk assessment at the organisational level, but we would promote any organisation where there is a prevalence of home and hybrid working, that the additional question set of home and hybrid workers be incorporated into that stress risk assessment. And then that can be used as a foundation for really informed and structured engagement with staff. What that would do is provide you with insight of the prevalence and patterns of stress risks, and also looking at those specific risks known to be associated with home and hybrid working. And what it does then is it gives you this opportunity to add a really detailed understanding to engage with staff once you've got that data from a stress risk assessment survey. You can then work with your people to understand what do these risks look like in our business, and then the best case scenario would be to co-develop meaningful solutions and then assess the impacts of any change that you make. So a stress risk assessment is a really important key here, and what it does is allows you to identify, explore and manage the risks that are prevalent for your home and hybrid workers. Next slide, Carl. So very briefly, to introduce the home and hybrid working tool, this is an additional question set that was developed in partnership with local authorities and the Centre for Human Factors, and then was part of a collaboration with the team from TSO and HSE and another partner, SNAP. And this tool, or this question set, was developed really as part of a necessity to understand the risks facing local authority workers at the start of lockdown. So we undertook a piece of work that was funded by the local digital fund at the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and that department funded a series of projects, and this question set was developed as the first output of that piece of work. It was based on qualitative research with a huge number of home and hybrid workers, and then we undertook a serious process of psychometric scale development. And what we found was that the majority of the risks associated with home and hybrid working were very closely aligned with those SIT domains that Carl introduced at the start. Do you want to go to the next slide, please, Carl? And I won't go over these in detail, but if you'd like to understand a little bit more about what the content of the home and hybrid question set includes, then we'll go back to TSO and they'll be able to provide you with much more information. The domains, as you can see, really well overlap with the SIT, but the content of those domains varies. So for instance, being under the heading demands, being constantly available, and the nature of the work intensity of using digital tools are elements of this question set. We've got a new domain that emerged around home and work interface, which isn't surprising, and an additional item around the risks associated with being remotely monitored whilst working from home. Carl, do you want to go to the next slide? And just as a brief explanation of how this fits with the stress indicator tool, it is an additional question set that users of the SIT can opt to add on for those people who work from home or in a hybrid way. Then there's an additional opportunity to add a very brief measure of mental health that would allow an organisation to assess the current levels of anxiety and depression within the organisation. And then risk management can really be targeted around these very specific home and hybrid factors for those people working in that way. Next slide, please. So we have a few top tips for managers and a few top tips for those people working in a home and hybrid way. These are not scientifically derived. These are insights developed on the basis of our engagement with many, many organisations over the last 4 years with people working in a home and hybrid way. And they're based on those things that are fed back from home and hybrid workers that they find particularly difficult. The first one for managers is do everything you can to be clear and fair wherever possible about office-based requirements for hybrid working. If you need the team to be in the office, it's incredibly important to say why. What do you expect to gain from that? Because for some people, this is an excellent way of being able to balance the challenges of their life and their work together. So, of course, it's a really good balance to bring people into the office, but we find that if there's confusion about what is the aim of this and what you're hoping to achieve by doing this, then that breeds some resentment and some conflict. And the other thing is making sure that appropriate workstations or office space is available when required to come into the office, and then there's nowhere to work. That is a real challenge for people. Ensure that workload allows for some office team time. When you go into work, it does impact on a person's productivity if they're required to do a lot of focused work. And we need to be able to account for that in a person's workload. Incredibly important and really obvious, but key to mention, try wherever possible to arrange one-to-one time, face-to-face if possible, but to ensure that you actually, as a manager, have that time one-to-one with your team members, because they've lost that informal opportunity if they're not in the office regularly. There's a real opportunity to understand what the challenges are for a person when you engage with a one-to-one, and this is probably more important here than anywhere else. And the last point around that regular one-to-one time is one of the things that's come back to us constantly is, yeah, my manager really, really cares about me. And how do you know that? What does that look like? They just check in. They ask me if I'm okay. They randomly send me a message and just check I'm okay. Those informal check-ins are hugely valued and really powerful and make a person feel cared about. And it's a really small thing that you can do. The third point is one thing we do know, and we have really reliable and established data on, is the importance of control in the workplace. So wherever possible, try and enhance the sense of control and give people opportunities to have some discretion about the ways they do their work wherever that's possible. And all of this is in a perfect world, and we are realistic. We understand some of these challenges just have to be lived with. But things like control, if you can't control one aspect of the work, then perhaps look for other ways that you can offer some sense of control to your team members. And the final thing is about establishing a healthy culture. When people are working remotely, it's really, really important to set boundaries around out-of-hours communications. Be clear that you have an expectation as a manager that they will take their screen breaks, and that make sure that you are aware of the nature of the workstation that they have. Next slide, please, Carl. So in terms of top tips for home workers, I think the big message is we have to be even more responsible for our own health. We must try to schedule some time for face-to-face connections if that's possible. It's not possible for people who work from home 100% of the time, but for most people, having that opportunity to spend some face-to-face time with colleagues has been found again and again to offset some of the risks associated with being isolated at home. Ensure you've got a plan to meet regularly with your team if possible, and your manager if possible, and be proactive about that. And accept that this is going to impact your productivity for that particular day, but that it's also really important for quality of working life and for the wider elements of the quality of the work that you do, which really benefit from those interactions. Diary control is incredibly important, and I think it's something that a lot of us don't get right, and I would include myself in that. If you have control of your diary, ensure you diarise break times. Put those in well in advance and try and ensure that people respect those break times and challenge it if they're not respected. And perhaps consider shortening those standard meetings instead of 30 minutes or an hour, to shorten them as a standard so that you've got a few moments to either stretch, respond to something that's come up in the last few minutes, so that you're not constantly back to back to back. That's so we know is so critical for managing mental health. If you don't have control of your diary, which is the case for many, many people, communicate wherever possible what your preferences are, what your needs are, and try and ensure that people understand what the implications are for you. And finally, consider your physical well-being. It's incredibly important that people working from home are working in a way that's ergonomically optimal, and that you communicate any concerns you have around that physical health, and make sure you move, walk, stretch, and do those things that we know are important for longer-term health. Last slide. Thank you. So a lot of information there. It's an incredibly complex topic, but the things that we really wanted you to take away from this, home and hybrid working is new still, and it's complex, and it has risks that we need to try and understand. We know that there are pros and cons for these work characteristics, and we also know that how those new characteristics are experienced and their relationship to stress is dependent on a huge range of work and personal factors. And the priority here is managing those known risks and then engaging with staff to help them develop healthier workplaces.